That's a lie. There's no way insoles can absorb so much energy. This is my general impression about so-called high-tech insoles. In fact, they actually do have benefits, but there are also things that have not been explained very clearly. Let's scientifically break it down and see under what conditions they work the best. When you land, a large impact is naturally applied to your feet. The greater the impact, the greater the strain on your soles of your feet and joints. Remind Insoles claims shock absorption performance of as much as 90% based on an official test called ASTM F1976. In this test, an 8.5 kg weight is dropped onto the test sample from a height of several centimeters, and the impact force transmitted through the test sample to the testing machine is measured. Under typical test conditions, the impact force is about 200 kg. A force of 200 kg may be difficult to picture, but when you run, it is said that a load of about 2.5 to 3 times your body weight is applied to your foot. If you weigh 70 kg, this is equivalent to roughly 200 kg. So these test conditions can be said to reproduce a landing that occurs during actual running. The question is whether it really absorbs 90% of the impact. The only thing I know that can do it is that shield made of that special metal. If it could actually absorb 90% of the energy, placing this insole at the point where a meteorite is going to land would prevent the destruction of the Earth. Plus, if it could absorb 90% of the impact from below, the force you apply from above should also be 90% weaker. So no matter how hard you pop, you should probably not be able to get your board off the ground. But that doesn't happen. Like that, there's something strange about the expression 90% absorption. Even so, Remind Insoles is not lying. In fact, shock absorption performance based on ASTM standard is a value measured under specific test conditions. And we must be careful about the difference between the performance in this test and in actual landing. Now, let's first consider what impact during landing actually is. Imagine dropping two eggs from the same height. One is dropped directly onto the ground, causing it to crack open and spill its contents. The other lands on a soft cushion and comes to a stop without breaking. Meaning, stopping slowly greatly reduces the peak impact force applied to the object. On the flip side, the egg cracks when it stops suddenly. The amount of kinetic energy both eggs lose is virtually the same, because they fall from the same height. But taking enough time to stop helps an object reduce the peak pressure before stopping. There is another important factor that affects the severity of landing: area. We don't have any problem landing on the entire sole, but we also know our feet don't really enjoy landing primo. In order to decrease the peak pressure on one specific spot, the kinetic energy needs to be distributed over a wider area. So the impact of landing involves two factors: the time it takes for the object to come to a stop, and the size of the contact area. These effects have been tested in the classic ball drop test. An insole is placed on top of a concrete block, and a bowling ball is dropped onto it, and thanks to the insole, the concrete block stays as it was. And when they drop the ball without the insole, the concrete block breaks. At first glance, it may seem like the impact is actually absorbed, but it's not exactly accurate. I hate physics, but there's one thing I can be sure of: energy can't suddenly disappear. In fact, if you look closely, the insole begins to deform at the moment the ball makes contact with it, and slows it down over a longer period of time. This is just like an egg coming to a gradual stop on a cushion. As a result, the maximum peak impact force transmitted to the concrete is reduced, making it less likely to break. At the same time, the insole distributes the load over a wider area. Just like landing on a flat surface instead of primo, this also helps reduce the peak force concentrated at a single point, preventing it from breaking. See, the energy is not going away, it's just received for a longer duration of time, and on a wider surface. An insole that can do that is great, but does it really have meaning when it comes to actual landing? In fact, there is a major difference between a ball drop test and an actual landing, and the effects of the difference should be considered very carefully. The biggest difference is the presence of other joints and muscles. In a ball drop test, only a single ball is dropped. In actual landing, however, the ankles, knees, hips, and many other joints naturally work together. In fact, most of the kinetic energy is absorbed by the muscles and tendons and converted into heat. Earlier, I did say that an insole can increase the time it takes for an object to come to a stop, and reduces the peak impact force. However, its contribution is very small compared to the amount of energy absorbed by the entire body. Think about it, insoles can deform by only a few millimeters. In contrast, the human body can lower itself by several tens of centimeters. From a physics perspective, proportionally, the duration of time insoles can increase is pretty much limited. The main character of landing is your body. It becomes clear when we look at another experiment. You have probably seen demonstrations where an egg is dropped onto an insole. In the case of Remind Insoles, and actually Dan's default insole, the egg indeed does not break. However, if you stack two eggs together and drop them, something interesting happens. Every time I tried it, at least one egg cracked, and in many cases it was the bottom egg. When the bottom egg comes into contact with the insole deforms, allowing the egg to slow down more gradually and begin coming to a stop. The top egg, however, continues falling due to inertia, crushing the bottom egg. This is exactly what happens if you don't flex your body. Although an insole may be able to reduce the peak impact force to some extent, it does not eliminate all the kinetic energy transmitted through the entire body. Only your body can do that, so if you keep your knees straightened, for example, your muscles can't absorb it and they cause injury in your joint. Another difference between the ball drop test and an actual landing is the magnitude and duration of the load. In the ball drop test, the duration of the impact is just a split second. But in skateboarding, after making the initial contact with the ground, your body continues to pressurize your feet for some time. The problem is that the insole can't keep deforming forever, and actually quickly reaches a point at which it can't reduce the impact force through further deformation anymore. Even after that, the body continuously presses down on it, but because its deformation ability has already been maxed out, it can't reduce the impact force anymore, and the role of handling the remaining kinetic energy shifts to the body. And this is what is usually not really said about the test in the ASTM standard. If an object hits the insole instantaneously and exerts a relatively small force, it could reduce the peak impact force by 90%. However, in skateboarding, where the landing force is much bigger and lasts longer, the role of the insole can be limited depending on what you do. So after all, what do insoles do? Do they mean nothing? Absolutely not. For example, these insoles can be especially helpful for people who can't bend their whole body smoothly. Beginners and old skaters in particular often have stiffer movement, making it harder to absorb impact with the entire body. When that happens, the force is concentrated on the joints as it can't go anywhere else. Then it's just like the stacked eggs, the bones on the other sides try to compress the internal tissue. It is true that there is a limit to how much impact force insoles can absorb, but they are effective at reducing lighter, shorter forces like the ones you feel on your feet while running. If you dump up so high and your landing becomes stiff, I'd say they are scientifically meaningful. When comparing Remind Insoles with advanced default insoles, neither one caused the egg to crack. However, the Remind insoles clearly absorbed more of the impact, as shown by the egg bouncing to a lower height. In that respect, we can say it's better at lowering the peak impact. And how about the impact on the pop? As I said earlier, if it can dissipate the impact of landing, it might also weaken the pop. Fortunately, you don't have to worry too much about that. After your back foot begins pressing down the tail, the insole flattens out, and only then do you apply the final burst of force. Just like what happens in landing, after maxing out its shock dissipating capacity, it'll be just the same as popping without the insole. Finally, let's consider a more fundamental factor: body weight. Insoles can certainly help disperse some of the impact, but the greater the force applied to them, the more limited their effectiveness becomes. For example, consider a 25 kg child, a 70 kg adult, and a 140 kg adult. They jump and land from heights that are proportional to their body size. Compared with the 70 kg adult, the child has only about 1/4 of the landing energy to absorb. In contrast, the energy that the 140 kg adult has to absorb is twice as much. When the force becomes too great, even an excellent insole can no longer disperse it effectively enough. By understanding the characteristics and role of insoles and using them properly, they can help make your skateboarding experience more enjoyable. And that's all for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time.